Welcome back to Come Home to You. I'm your host, Jenny Swim, and I'm so glad you're here. Today we're doing things a little bit differently. For those of you who are joining me online, you can watch the podcast, Come Home to You podcast, via YouTube. Check out this episode there. This will be our first of many going forward. Today we're going to talk about something that has become near and dear to me because it was a question asked by a group of people I love. This was a group of young people, ages 19 to about 22. And as I asked them, what is your biggest challenge? And I was surprised by their answer. You would think it would be, well, I don't know what to study, or I'm not sure about this relationship in my life. But instead they asked me, how do I know what is real? How do I know what is true? There's so much information that can just be overwhelming. And this group of young people, one of them vocalized this concern. How do I walk out into my adulting landscape when I am not sure what I can actually trust or believe in the information that's coming into me? So today we're going to explore this. We make decisions every day. Who to trust, what to believe, when to speak up, when to walk away. But here's the problem. We act based on what we perceive to be true. And if what we're seeing, hearing, or sensing is distorted, then our choices will be too. We live in a world of competing narratives, just like my young friends experienced. There are curated realities our grandparents never dealt with. There's algorithm-fed information where we're prompted with stories and news that appears to be real. Learning how to discern in the world is a skill we now need to talk about. I'm sure I don't need to convince you why it's so important to be able to discern correctly. The quality of our decisions, whether we're at work, we're in our relationships, we're in leadership, it all depends on the accuracy of our perception. What are the lenses we're looking through? What are the assumptions we're making? What are the perceptions offered to us? In a professional setting, poor discernment might mean we have misaligned hires or a strategic misstep or wasted resources. In our personal life, it might mean overcommitment or burnout or strained relationships or staying in something that isn't working. I so appreciated the wisdom of my young friends who recognized we can't build meaningful or aligned lives on half-truths or noise. We need to know what's real to respond wisely. So how do we do this? What are signals or tools what are signals we can look for or tools we might use so when we go out into the world, we can recognize truth and reality? I want to set this up an understanding dissonance and the role that dissonance might play in helping to signal, hey, something is not true. It's not aligned. If I'm building a home and I want that 90-degree corner, I need to make sure those pieces align, that I can build my home in a way that it's constructed in a true manner, that it's not misaligned and therefore more easily broken down or affected by storms or other things that would upset the integrity of that home. The same goes for us, right? So how do we start to notice dissonance to signal, hey, there might be a misalignment in how I'm structuring my worldview, my reality? Dissonance is best described, I believe, with a musical metaphor. So for those of you who are musical and you understand harmony, you note that there are different keys being played on a piano or different notes being sung and taken together. They're very resonant. It's a beautiful sound. But when the pitch is off, like a piano is out of tune or a key is slightly flat, everything sounds wrong, even if the technical structure is correct. And even if you're not musical, like me, we can understand what that feels like, right? You can kind of hear or perceive something is a little bit off, even if you can't explain why. So dissonance often shows up before we know what's wrong, before we can actually name what is out of alignment. So professionally, we may see dissonance in a lack of clarity, in high turnover, in decision paralysis, in repeated conflict. In our personal lives, we might see dissonance in anxiety, in chronic tension, in overthinking or circular thinking. And it's really common for us to try to fix the symptom instead of looking for that misalignment and going to that root cause. So let's talk a little bit about how we might personally look for that misalignment when we get that signal of dissonance, that something just feels off, even if I can't name it. And for my young friends, right, they could go online and they could see a picture that looked completely real, that was a deep fake. They couldn't trust their five senses. So how do we then use ourselves as instrument to make the best decision possible? We're probably not going to be perfect at it. I'm not, for sure. But what are some of those principles and tools we can use to pay attention to dissonance, to that thought inside of us, to that niggle that might say something is not right here? So in order to do that, we have to understand that foundationally, we are the instrument. We are the instrument of discernment. Our bodies, our minds, our intuition is how we receive and interpret the world. And so, like any instrument, they can be out of tune. We could be overstimulated, numbed, distracted, overloaded, and that can affect our clarity. Now, you might be thinking, Jenny, I don't recognize dissonance. I can look at something on social media, it can look completely real. Or I can go out into the world and I want to adopt the latest fashions and the latest health recommendations from all the experts, and I want to be happy in the way everyone prescribes for me to be happy. Okay, it's fair. It's sometimes hard to hear and recognize dissonance. I personally have made plenty of mistakes. I have literally been deceived, thinking one thing was what it was, and it was not. That's going to happen, and that's part of our mortal journey. So we accept that. However, I invite you to consider when you have been wrong about something, when you have misunderstood it or you've made a faulty assumption, is there a moment where some little part of you, some inner quiet voice said to you, pay attention, or this isn't right, or this is uncomfortable, or think again before you take a step? For me, every time I made a mistake and perceived something to be true that wasn't, or thought something was good intention toward me that wasn't, there was always some sort of signal. Now, oftentimes it was not logical. It wasn't something I could see or experience with my five senses, but it was something I could pick up internally if I was quiet enough and listened. So we're going to cover that today when we get to some tools we might play around with and use. But first, I want to talk about what might be the sources of this dissonance. What can we trace these back to? And I want to invite two concepts. One is external distortion, which makes sense, right? It's the noise around us. It's curated content or manipulative media or social pressures. When I attended the Spy Museum in Washington, D.C., I thought it was really interesting to note that one of the tools of the trade was to flood a person's communications channel with noise. And the more noise you could put in there, the more information you could put in a communication channel, the more likely that person was to have distortion, to get false messages, to not have the clarity that they would need to accomplish their mission. So the same goes for us when we have so much noise. Sometimes it's not even faulty noise, it's just an overload of noise that can cause distortion externally. Okay, so that can create some of that dissonance we might feel. The second one is a little more tricky, a little more difficult to pay attention to because we believe our internal voice. We have a bias to believing that. But the second one is internal distortion. So this might come through self-doubt, through unresolved trauma, through busyness. Just we're too busy to stop and to connect with ourselves. This can be disconnection from source and from source within ourselves, from our creator, that disconnection between body and spirit, if you will, whatever language you feel comfortable with. When we are not in that connection, we can affect the clarity of our instrument. We're not hearing as clearly. We're not perceiving as clearly. And if our internal instrument isn't tuned, even true data may sound off. What do? We've talked about dissonance. We've talked about external distortion and internal distortion. So what are some practical tools we could use to help us understand what is real and what is true? How do we learn to discern? As you know, I am not going to give you every answer. I don't have every answer. These are just 3 potential tools you can use. I invite you to consider your own wisdom, your own life experience, those things that already resonate and work for you as you consider what works for you to discern truth and reality. Here's 3 practices I'm going to offer. The first is to triangulate data. So this just simply means we're cross-checking what we're hearing. And we do that by bringing in multiple sources. So we might have some data we can observe. We might pair that with our own lived experience. Does that match up with principles we've experienced in our life, with things we already know to be true? And how does that match with external feedback? Sometimes we can really have our own biases and our own distortions internally. But as we go externally and we listen to trusted sources, we have mentors, we have coaches, counselors, we can really get some good feedback and perspective that we might miss if we're just coming from ourselves. So we're triangulating our data by bringing in multiple data sources. That's our first tool. Our second tool, use your whole self. So we have a bias toward relying on our logic or our intellect. This makes sense. Our reason is very important. But oftentimes our logic and intellect is only based on what we can see, smell, taste, touch, hear. And oftentimes that dissonance is a felt sense. It's a niggle inside. It's a quiet little whisper. It's part of our body sensations that is just uncomfortable. So we can always ask, what does my head think about this? But let's also ask, what is my heart saying about this? What is that intuition, that transcendent, intelligent part of me saying? That's the part of me that's connected to my purpose, to my values, to my mission, to my creator, my creation. And that internal little voice that just maybe whispers something that's very easy to override. So pausing to listen to that can be really important. The third intelligence I invite people to listen to is that somatic intelligence or that body intelligence. And to listen to that, we might notice our sensations. We might notice that instinct that says, ooh, don't go there. We can't explain it with our mind, but there's just some part of us that wants to stay back or not connect. If you're interested in learning more about that somatic intelligence, you might be interested in checking out episode 11, Befriending Your Body, How to Partner with Your Somatic Intelligence. Okay, so our number 2 is to use our whole self, to listen to all the parts of us that are providing data and information to get a more fulsome picture of what is real, what is truth. So the last practical tool is to return to stillness and presence. So this simply means we notice where our feet are, we listen to our breath, we just take a moment to be with ourselves and listen to those parts of us. We could set a timer for 1 minute, for 3 minutes. It doesn't have to be long, but to take a minute to pay attention and slow down enough to listen to the signals that your body may want to offer, that your natural intelligence may have for you. I was on a train once, transporting myself and my children from one big city to another. And there was so much external noise, external distortion. There was also internal distortion happening for me because I was so worried that I was going to miss my stop. I'd never been on this train before. I was kind of scared to be doing this and being in charge and making sure I didn't mess up. And it was really difficult to hear the train conductor. I had to pause and focus so much on the sound of that train conductor's voice and really tune out everything else in order to make the right decision for my family, to get us to the right location. This is how stillness and presence works. It's that tuning out of everything else and tuning in to yourself, to your space, to your instrument. When you do that, you might ask questions like, what am I sensing here? What's underneath the noise? What's important for me to listen to? What's that discomfort telling me? Discernment isn't about certainty. It's about integrity. And when you're at home in yourself, you're far more equipped to know what aligns and what doesn't and what to do next. We start to get that muscle memory of what truth feels like, what alignment feels like, so that we're built on a structure that can withstand the storms that come. All right, so let's recap. We live in a time when information is really easy to come by, but knowing what is true is much more difficult. And our clarity doesn't come from having all the answers, and we're going to make mistakes. But as we spend time recognizing dissonance, being with our own instrument and tuning our own instrument, we can be more able to navigate the uncertainty, to recognize what is true and real, and to make decisions that are wise and based on correct data. We talked about the simple, practical tools of triangulating data, of listening to our whole self, our head, our heart, and our body, and of practicing stillness and presence. I want to leave you with a quote that comes from an unknown source, but I think adds some wisdom to this discussion. Quote, "Seek all the truth, lest error seize you. Fear not the truth that does not please you." End of quote. As we embark on this journey to discover truth and reality, may we have the courage to seek for what is true, to be honest with ourselves and with others, so that we can come home more fully to our own instrument. Until we meet again, thanks so much for joining me today. If you found that this episode was helpful, please feel free to pass it on to someone else who might find similar benefit.